in Europe for decades. And what's really united us has been anger, real anger about this crazy, cruel badger cull policy. Now, a few weeks ago, we saw that anger culminate in Mr. Owen Paterson, Lord Lucan of Parliament, we call him. He'd been away for so long, most people have forgotten what he looked like. He dragged himself back into Westminster with his head down, and he had to explain that things weren't going so well with his badger cull. A few months before, he was telling us he was going to roll it out to 10 new zones in 2014, and over the next 4 years it'd be 10 new zones in each year afterwards, so we'd see 50 of them across the country. He said he wouldn't stop for animal welfare campaigners, he wouldn't stop for those who are concerned about killing these animals. He was going to push on because it's what the farmers needed and it's what the economy needed. Well, he got a nasty shock, didn't he? He found that tens of thousands of people were not going to sit by idly and allow him and his mates at the NFU to go around slaughtering our wildlife. We were going to make a stand. We were going to tell him it was wrong. And not only that, we were also going to impact on Parliament themselves. We were going to get to the MPs, his backbenchers in the Tory party, in the Liberal Party, in the Labour Party, and we're going to make them think very, very hard about the political cost of killing our wildlife and killing our badgers in this way. Let's be clear, most MPs would rather have a nuclear waste dump in their backyard than have a badger cull today. And that's because what you have done, what you have achieved, how you've come together, how you've worked hard, how you've united in a way that we haven't seen for a very long time when it comes to standing up for any issue in this country and our democracy. We have made people sit up. We have made them think. We have made them consider the consequences of this cull policy. Many MPs 12 months ago were convinced the farmers had a good case. They were convinced that bovine TB was largely down to badgers and killing them was justifiable. You will find it very, very hard now outside a small little number of MPs with farming constituencies who would hold that view. And if you heard the debate a few weeks ago in Parliament, you've been very pleased because the quality and standard of that debate was very, very good. Many MPs now understand all the issues that we've all been very concerned about when it comes to this policy. Let's be clear. Firstly, we now have the independent expert panel report published. The government tried very, very hard to hide that report. They tried very hard just to take little bits of that report and summarise it and spin it in a way that would have hidden most of the facts. But at the end of the day, they made some big fundamental errors. They didn't share it with MPs. Paterson got very arrogant. He thought he could sit on it. That just made members of Parliament more angry. In the end, he had to release the whole report for all of us to read. And it is a shocking report because what it tells us is that this was contract killing on the cheap. Basically, the government decided it was going to lift the protection on a protected species, the badger, and it was going to allow pest controllers who were poorly trained and not monitored to run around the countryside at night and shoot them. And we know what an absolute mess they made of that. None of those individuals really cared about animal welfare. None of those individuals really cared about professionalism. And what they did is they blasted away at these animals. They shot many of them. They wounded many of them. They even took roadkill badgers and put them into the numbers just to bring them up. They were doing things that should never have been going on in our countryside when it comes to protecting our wildlife. It should shame our government. It should shame anyone that was involved that would allow that to go on. And that particular report has been damning. It's like a hand grenade under this whole policy because it throws up a number of major issues now in terms of going ahead. Yes, the national cull policy is dead, I will tell you that, because if you talk to MPs like I do, they don't want this policy to come back. You know, Owen Paterson will tell the NFU that, oh, well, maybe in a few years we'll be able to get it back on the agenda. It's not coming anytime soon. And Princess Anne can talk all she wants about badger gassing, and the BBC can break their charter commitments as they did in impartiality on dealing with a controversial issue to give her free rein to make those statements and to publicise it in the way that they did. But what's happened is it's just made people more angry and more aware about how inhumane and how cruel gassing is. Badgers do not go asleep when you gas a set. A set has many entry and exit points. We know from research undertaken at Porton Down, the weapons facility, we know from research undertaken in the 1970s that when you pump carbon monoxide and cyanide and other types of gas into a set, it does not disperse equally. It doesn't go down the tunnels and around the bends to kill all the animals outright. Maybe 60-70% will die quickly. 20 to 30% will die long, painful deaths. Many of those animals will have brain damage and will move and you'll disrupt the colonies. If they do carry TB, They could spread the disease as a consequence. Gassing will not be acceptable to any MPs. Gassing is worse than shooting, and they don't want shooting. So you can rest assured that you're not going to see gassing on the agenda in any political manifesto this side of the election. You can be rest assured you're not going to see a major rollout of this badger cull. But we are still left with culling possibly in Gloucestershire and Somerset in 2014 this year. And that's only to save the face of Owen Paterson. That's only to save the face of Morag Raymond and certain leaders at the National Farmers Union. And that is not acceptable, because once again, we're playing politics with our wildlife. We're willing just to kill large numbers of animals just to save the egos of some politicians or some industry leaders. If you think that's acceptable, I don't. And that's why we're going to have to make a stand. And that's why we as the Badger Trust are thinking about legal action at the moment. We have a letter in with the government that lays out a number of serious concerns about continuing the pilot culls in Gloucestershire and Somerset. I think our arm has been strengthened by the British Veterinary Association statement this week, which clearly has got the veterinary industry off the fence at last to accept they do have a serious issue of concern about animal welfare. They are responsible, the veterinary industry, for holding the highest levels of animal welfare, not just for companion animals, but for wild animals too. And they know, looking at that independent expert panel report, that those culls were not humane. They know, despite what Owen Paterson intends for this summer in Gloucestershire and Somerset, you cannot go on culling badgers without extensive monitoring and controls of those gunmen. But the gunmen don't want any controls, because they said to Owen Paterson, we made a mess of it last year because we were monitored. If you monitor us even more, if you put in more controls, there's no way we're going to be able to kill those badgers. And the farmers know that as well, and they're not going to put up the money if those controls go in place. But legally, we have a strong demand for the government to do exactly that. We have a strong demand for the government to also tell us how many badgers live in Gloucestershire and Somerset after all that's gone on this summer, after the floods that we saw in Somerset, the worst for over 100 years. We do not know how many badgers we have in this country. There are lots of estimates based upon set surveys, looking at holes in the ground, but they're not accurate to the large number of animals that we might find in some sets and smaller numbers in others. They don't take account of the climatic problems that we've had, and the flooding and disease and other issues. And what they don't take account of is something that I'm very aware of after 6 weeks of being in the Badger Trust job, is the huge scale of illegal persecution of badgers that we're seeing up and down this country. Wherever I go, I see reports of animals being killed and thrown by the side of the road. I see reports of people hunting these animals, using dogs and going down and baiting them, of using illegal gambling sets being set up to kill these animals, of farmers killing them, gassing them and shooting them in large numbers. The level of persecution of badgers, I'm clear in my mind, has never been as bad as it is today. And that is largely down to this government and its policy, and to the indifference that we see from the farming industry, I'm afraid from the judicial and police at times as well, from the landowning industries and shooting estates and others. And it's not just badgers. Our hen harriers, our golden eagles, our hares, across a whole range of species, our seals are getting persecuted and killed because the industry interests are getting a free rein. No one is reeling them in and saying, hold on a minute. It doesn't matter if you're a fishing interest or you're a farming interest or you're a shooting interest. You have no right to illegally kill these animals and get a free pass to get away with it. And the one thing that we will see out of this badger debate is that we will make wildlife crime count. You know, I'm speaking in Parliament in a few weeks' time, and of course I'm going to be talking about the concerns of the cull, but I'm also going to be saying that we've got to get on top of that persecution issue as well. Now, just coming back to the legal action we're likely to be taking. We might not win in the High Court, but you can be damn well certain we'll have millions of people that will support us across this country. You'll be damn well certain that most of the MPs in the House of Commons now support us, the most scientific opinion will support us, and you can be damn certain it's going to scare the hell out of the National Farmers Union. Those farmers at the moment are thinking about culling. So we will not be taking that action in a political vacuum. We will be taking that action with huge public support. Even the veterinary industry, as I said before, is now having second thoughts as well. We do have alternatives to this policy. I was in Derbyshire on Monday with a Conservative MP that had changed his mind on culling, that came out with us and the Wildlife Trust and Badger Trust, working with NFU farmers on their farm in Derbyshire to start vaccinating their badgers. That is the best form of cooperation that we're going to see. And the one thing, remember, when Owen Paterson was mumbling about his long-term commitment to culling, his civil servants had played a blinder behind the scenes, because he had to admit that he was going to have to put more money on the table for badger vaccination. He was going to have to put millions of pounds to vaccinate badgers in the border regions of those TB hotspot areas. Now, interestingly enough, that means that basically we all have an opportunity to step forward. So the wildlife trusts at the moment, the badger trusts, and all the groups that are involved up and down this country in protecting badgers are now beginning to get themselves organised. We are putting a case to government. We will get access to that public money, and we will start to bring about a much more effective vaccination policy across this country. This is the big society in action that David Cameron has talked about for so long, and it really will begin to make a difference when it comes to this policy. But it's going to cause a dilemma for our farming friends, because if you've got your friend across the field who's getting publicly funded vaccination program in place with the wildlife, badger trusts and volunteer groups coming in and helping, and he's sitting in a TB hotspot area, he's got no chance of a badger cull, because it's not going to happen. Is he just going to sit idly by? No, he's going to say, I want a bit of that action too. I want a bit of that public money, and I want to vaccinate these badgers. And that's what's going to happen. You are now moving from a failed badger culling policy to a much more widespread badger vaccination policy. And the other thing, I was speaking to the Farmers Weekly only yesterday on this point. Farmers have been calling me saying they're getting increasingly angry about the National Farmers Union position on vaccination of cattle. Why is it that they've not been fighting for vaccination of cattle? Why is it they don't have demonstrations like this of farmers calling for vaccination? Why aren't they marching down Whitehall demanding it? Well, I'm afraid it's because there's certain leaders in the NFU that never wanted vaccination of cattle, because all they care about is the international markets for breaking up their cattle and selling them in pieces around the world. Now, Adam Quinney, the former Vice President of the NFU, was very clear about that recently. He spoke at the Royal Society and was very honest about his business. He said, listen, I break my cows into pieces. I sell the intestines to Japan. I sell the liver to Spain. I sell the hooves to South Korea. Every bit of that cow has some value. Yes, and obviously, Adam, the big concern you have is if you start injecting that cow against TB, you might lose the hoofs market in South Korea. You might lose the intestines market in Japan. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not going to see all our badgers destroyed so you can sell hooves to South Korea or intestines to Japan of your cows. We are going to have to find a better way. And anyone in the NFU leadership that truly believes that it can continue to focus on that type of business plan at the extent of destroying all wildlife around British farms must be insane. Because we do know, as the British people, that's not acceptable. And we will now get those food retailers off the fence, and we will tell them it's not acceptable either. We have to start producing better quality food from our farms to give them a decent income to sell into the UK food supply chain. So yes, they should be able to sell good quality meat, and they should be able to sell good quality dairy foods into the supermarkets so we can buy them. But they must put in place welfare schemes as well. Those welfare schemes must allow those cattle to be vaccinated. If you put in place a passport scheme, you could quickly sell those cattle into the UK market without even having to worry about a 10-year timetable from the European Union. We could break that logjam in a matter of years, and we will be taking that case to the food retailers like Sainsbury's and others in the months ahead. And we will be putting the pressure on them with MPs and others to say time has now come for you to take some responsibility. We also must accept that things are moving in the right direction on tighter biosecurity and cattle control movements. We brought cattle TB rates down in England over the last 12 months by 13.6%. In the last 5 years in Wales, it's come down by over 48%. It's not rocket science that's done that. It's been hard work at the farm gate level to basically improve biosecurity, to tighten down control movements of